Fuck, I'm wearing the wrong shirt. Damn it. Hello, Jacksonites, and welcome to the 30th episode of Super Kaiju Binge. By my calculations, I'm probably 1/3 of the way through Super Kaiju Binge. So, we'll call it some kind of a milestone. And indeed you do, because today we're talking about a special film for myself. Today, we will be discussing Godzilla vs. Gigan from 1972. Oh boy, this movie. Godzilla vs. Gigan is a very special Godzilla movie for myself because, as I've stated in my Godzilla vs. Ghidorah review, the 70s Godzilla movies is some of my favorite eras of Godzilla. To me, it's just the most consistently good all across the board. These 5 70s Godzilla movies, the Megalon is, spoiler alert, lacking in many areas, but Megalon has a lot of entertainment value for me because of what it's trying to be. But more on that when I talk about Godzilla versus Megalon. But the 70s era of Godzilla is just, to me, so good. And Godzilla versus Gigan is the best of the 70s Godzilla movies, in my opinion. Well, Mechagodzilla comes very, very close. But this one for me is the best of the bunch. Godzilla vs. Gigan is a very, also like with Godzilla vs. Ghidorah, not quite as much, but in a similar vein. Godzilla vs. Gigan is a very contentious and maligned Godzilla movie. There are those that absolutely hate this film and say it's one of the worst Godzilla movies ever made. Like I do myself. Like when I would scour Godzilla videos on YouTube when I was young, I would see Godzilla vs. Gigan pop up on top 10 worst Godzilla movie lists all the time. And I never really understood that when I was growing up. And then there are others out there that say Godzilla vs. Gigan is very underrated and is one of the better Godzilla movies. And obviously, I fall into that camp for multiple reasons. Godzilla vs. Gigan is a very, very underrated gem. And one of the most recent people who I've discovered is a big fan of this is Lord Hellhound from Horror and Metal. He's told me that he thinks Godzilla vs. Gigan is the most underrated Godzilla movie of the entire franchise. Big words, but I happen to agree. Personally, Godzilla vs. Gigan goes back a very, very, very long way for myself. Because Godzilla vs. Gigan was the very, very, very first Godzilla movie that I ever owned. Me and my dad, I was very young. I think I was about 4 or maybe 5 years old when I first saw this. He and I were out driving with a couple of friends of his, and we just happened to stop by a not gas station, a garage sale of all things. So we hopped out and started looking around. And lo and behold, I come across a VHS tape of Godzilla vs. Gigan. And I was just absolutely blown away. I picked it up and I brought it over to my dad and I said, please, 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 please get this for me. To which my dad begrudgingly, very much so, got it for me, because my dad is kind of a square when it comes to movies. He despises Godzilla. He is very, very square overall. But he bought it for me, and I took it home, and I remember sitting down and watching it and just being like, I thought it was one of the greatest things I'd ever seen in my life. And honestly, ever since then, this movie's always been a favorite. I've always really, really, really enjoyed this movie. It did escape me for a while, but when I got the Kraken release on DVD, when it was re-released, I remember sitting down right after I watched Godzilla versus Hedorah, and I just dug the living fuck out of it. I was having a shit ton of nostalgia flashbacks. I was having a total blast rewatching the movie, and that's when it was firmly cemented for me, like saying, "Yeah, this is one of my favorites, without a doubt." Um, oh shit, did I say 1971? Fuck. Yeah, Godzilla vs. Gigan is from 1972. I don't know if I said that earlier, but yeah. So that's something to fix in post. Um, and the production for Godzilla vs. Gigan was kind of a mess. Well, not really a mess, but just like figuring out what to do with this movie was a bit of a mess. An early draft of this movie that became Godzilla vs. Gigan was submitted in 1971 by author uh, Takashi Kimura, going by his pen name Karo Mabuchi, being titled Godzilla vs. the Space Monsters Earth Defense Directive, about an alien that resembles a large brain called Miko. Was this the potential inspiration for Krang? Intending to conquer the Earth using King Ghidorah, Gigan, and Megalon, later, of course, to be reworked into Godzilla vs. Megalon. Godzilla and Anguirus were to appear in Tokyo in defense of Earth, and Miko was to use the three space monsters to install his being into a giant statue of Majin Tool, a fictional Inca god, which had been erected at Tokyo Science Land. Gigan would use his buzzsaw on his chest to cut the statue, causing it to bleed. Majin Tool, now having come to life and inhabiting the statue, allies itself with Godzilla and Anguirus. The three monsters were to defeat the space creatures, and Godzilla destroys Miko in the process. And after this, Majin Tool again turns to stone. Was this Toho's attempt to cash in on Daimajin? Damn, that sounds like Daimajin. Shinichi Sekizawa would draft a new story using many of Takashi Kimura's ideas, and Sekizawa's pitch, which was titled The Return of King Ghidorah, featured Godzilla, Rodan, and Varan in combat with King Ghidorah, Gigan, and a new monster called Mogu. Except for its monster cast, this draft was reportedly much closer to the final film version of Godzilla vs. Gigan. It's kind of a shame. I've said this before. I kind of really do wish that both of those movies could have been made, because I think those would have been made, especially Kimura's version, honestly. I do prefer Shinichi Sekizawa over Takashi Kimura, but I do think Kimura's original script for this movie would have been a fantastic film, in my opinion. But alas, those two movies never got made, and we did end up with a good product with, of course, Godzilla vs. Gigan. So with all that being said, let us get into the plot of Godzilla vs. Gigan, shall we? It's actually pretty simple and straightforward. Giant insectoid aliens resembling cockroaches from the dying planet M Space Hunter Nebula plot to colonize the Earth, their planet having become uninhabitable after another race similar to humans on the planet polluted it. More remnants of the anti-pollution messages of Godzilla vs. Hedorah are stinking up the place, and then died out from the effects of their own destruction. The aliens assumed the forms of dead humans and work as the development staff of the peace-themed theme park World Children's Land, the centerpiece of which is a Godzilla tower. The Nebula M aliens plan to use the space monsters Gigan and King Ghidorah, guided by two action signal tapes, to wipe out human civilization. Mangaka, or manga artist, Genko Kotaka stumbles onto their plan after being hired as a concept artist for the park. When Genko and his friends accidentally obtain one of the action signal tapes and play it, Godzilla and Anguirus hear the signal and realize something is amiss. Godzilla sends Anguirus to investigate, and when he approaches Tokyo, the JSDF misunderstands the monster's intentions and drive him away with fire. Well, like firing guns at him. Anguirus reports back to Monster Island, and Godzilla follows him back to Japan to save the Earth from Gigan and King Ghidorah. The aliens attempt to kill Godzilla with a lethal laser cannon hidden inside the mouth of the Godzilla Tower, but Genko and his companions use the aliens' over-reliance on technology against them, forcing the invaders to unwittingly destroy themselves. And after a very lengthy fight, Godzilla and Anguirus force Gigan and King Ghidorah back into space, and then Godzilla and Anguirus swim back to Monster Island. But not before Godzilla turns around and gives a roar of triumph in thanks to his human friends. Which is oddly fitting, because this movie was a couple of lasts for the franchise. It would be the last time that we would see King Ghidorah in a significant role, not counting Zone Fighter, which he appeared in 2 episodes of that show as the main antagonist. This would be the last time we would see King Ghidorah on screen for 19 years until Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah in 1991. This would be the last time that we would use this Godzilla suit, this being its most infamous appearance. I can't remember the name of this suit's name, but I'll talk about it later. And this was the very last time that Haruo Nakajima played Godzilla in the entire Godzilla franchise. He had played Godzilla ever since the original Gojira, except for Son of Godzilla. That suit wasn't made for him. But he had played Godzilla except for one movie ever since. And after the death of Eiji Tsuburaya, Haruo Nakajima just did not have the desire to continue suit acting. Even though he said that he could go on until he was 50, he just didn't have the enthusiasm to continue his work. So he retired from suit acting after this film. I mean, he had been suit acting for 18 years at this point, so I think he definitely earned a break. Because not only did he play Godzilla, he played Rodan. Yes, I know my hair just be looking whack. He played Rodan, Mogura, the Griffin in Latitude Zero, Gyra, King Kong, and he also did 10 episodes of the original Ultraman show, and I think he played a couple monsters in the original Ultra Q show as well. So he had certainly done a lot for the kaiju genre, so I think he definitely earned himself a break. But yeah, this is the last time that Haruo Nakajima plays Godzilla, but he definitely does go out with a very big bang. And upon this most recent viewing, the fact that Godzilla roars and gives a roar of triumph and thanks to his human friends, it's pretty fitting knowing that this was Haruo Nakajima's final Godzilla movie. But how about this plot? Well, it's a pretty simple, to quote Zazubar, high-octane monster rumble. It's a bit of a simple setup. It's a simple alien invasion story of aliens using monsters as their big weapons, and then Godzilla and another monster have to come in and save the world. It's typical superhero stuff. And something that Daniel Wickwire from Kaiju Movie Review, now Dan and Angela Gaming, but in a stream that I was a part of, well, I joined and talked to him in chat, but we were talking about the 70s Godzilla movies, and he told me that he thinks all of the 70s Godzilla movies feel like an episode of the original Spectre Man, which also the previous year, the Spectre Man came out, which I forgot to mention yesterday, but whatever. Spectre Man was a 70s tokusatsu superhero show that pretty much was a different studio's take on Ultraman. I've personally never seen Spectre Man, but I see where he's going at. Especially Gigan and especially Megalon. These two movies come off as being like extended episodes of a Japanese tokusatsu superhero show. Not a bad thing by any means, but these two, especially Megalon, come off as being Ultraman episodes. Just replace Ultraman with Godzilla, and it's the same basic format. But it's not a bad thing, especially for me being a gigantic Ultraman fan. Rewatching this movie, I'm just like, yeah, this feels like an Ultraman episode, but that's not bad because I dig it. It is also pretty reminiscent of a James Bond type story because there's a lot of corporate espionage elements with this film, and a lot of kind of spy-esque elements too that make this movie feel not necessarily derivative of James Bond, but it definitely does feel very inspired. Some people have listed that as a problem. I personally don't, because lots of movies were trying to emulate James Bond until Star Wars came around, which everything was trying to rip that off. And as Moonraker shows, including James Bond. But I don't mind it. I dig the shit out of it. I like this movie story. I like its plot. It's just a classic alien invasion monster fight movie, and it's entertaining as hell. So with all that being said, I have okay. Wait one sec. Alrighty. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Do I have 9? No, I have 10 pros and 4 cons yet again from Godzilla vs. Ghidorah. Can you tell I'm totally prepared? Okay, so with all that being said about the plot, let us jump into our pros for Godzilla vs. Gigan. Pro number 1 is I like this movie's cast. Continuing on from Godzilla vs. Ghidorah, though we don't have another child protagonist in this movie. That's in the next film. Oi. Shit. It's gonna be one of those videos. I like this movie's cast. They're a bunch of hippies. Well, not all of them are hippies, but they're a bit unconventional from your typical Godzilla cast. The main character, Genko, he's a manga artist, and he's kind of like an adult, grown-up, geeky shut-in. And you can tell that he's very nerdy, and he's kind of not really introverted, but he's a bit of a... He's a weird one. It's kind of like me, honestly. He's very into his geekiness, and he's very into his nerdiness, and that kind of oozes out of his personality and his persona. And he's a bit goofy and a bit childlike at times, which the dude constantly wears a damn trench coat all throughout the entire movie. You can just tell that he's a bit of a strange one, but he's not a bad guy in the slightest. And then when he comes across this alien conspiracy, he's like, I think I should like help out with this, like try to figure out what the hell's going on. So he's not dumb. Well, I mean, no, he's not dumb. He's just a bit goofy. But he certainly is a fun character to get attached to. His friends, not much to say about them. Like his girlfriend is one badass karate kicking chick, and she's honestly one of my favorite female protagonists just because she can fight. I wish more Godzilla characters like like that existed. But his two hippie friends, at first, the female is a bit annoying because she comes off as being just a bit whiny. But as soon as she explains her motivations in the film, she tries to be proactive and she tries to be helpful in this situation. So she's endearing for that. And his friend, or her friend, I think. No, I think he's just her friend. Let's see. Minoru Takashima as Shosaku. Yeah. He's funny. He's the comedic relief of the group. He's totally goofy. He always has a shade and grin on his face, and he is kind of a smartass, but he's a funny smartass. He's one of my favorite characters. I'll talk about one of my favorite lines from him. No, my favorite line when I get to this movie's humor, but he's great. So overall, and of course the villains too, the Nebulans, as I'll call them, the M78 Nebulans. They're kind of your basic standard evil aliens. Their motivations are nothing new. They just want to. They kind of feel like the Verusians from Gamma versus Virus. They see Earth as a natural new home, and they just want to take that over for themselves. But the actors playing the main two aliens, the chairman and Kubota, they're well acted and they're well written. The guy who plays Kubota, I always thought looked like Japanese Johnny Depp, because he looks a lot like Johnny Depp in my opinion, especially with the glasses and the mustache. But yeah, they're well acted. They come off as being threatening villains. They don't come off as being incompetent like the Natal from Battle on Outer Space. Oof, that's probably the worst Toho alien race. Or admittedly, kind of the Mysterians. There is one aspect of them that can be criticized, and I'll get to that when I get to my cons. But overall, I like the Nebulans. They're certainly decent enough villains. And they, unlike, well, I mean, kind of like the Keylaks from Destroy All Monsters, though to a lesser extent, they certainly do have two powerful monsters under their disposal, and they wreck some shit up in this movie. So you definitely can't. They're not like the Mysterians, that's for sure. Pro number 2 is the pacing. One of the biggest criticisms that a lot of people have for Godzilla vs. Gigan is that they constantly bitch about how long it takes for this movie to get going. There's like, oh God, the first half is so boring. It's so slow. Nothing happens till almost 50 minutes into the movie. There's no monster action until then. Well, yes, that is true. For myself, I like it. I like the fact that the first half is not really a kaiju movie. It's like a corporate espionage spy movie. It's tense. It's riveting. It's well done. It's well acted. It's well written. And most above all else, just to me, it's entertaining. I enjoy it a lot. The characters all have good chemistry. There's a good sense of suspense leading up to like the mystery of solving what's up with the Children's Land Association. Are these aliens? How long has this guy been missing, and where the hell has he been held? It's all really interesting corporate espionage stuff, and at least to me, I find it to be very riveting and entertaining. But overall, even when there's monsters on screen, there's little bits of monster action spread throughout the first half. It's just enough to tide you over until the last 40 minutes of this movie. Technically, the monster action starts at 49 minutes, exactly 49 minutes into this movie. But from then on out, because this movie is only 89 minutes, 49 minutes into the movie, from then on out, it's nothing but action. There's a couple moments where there's some setups of human action scenes, but from then on out, it's either Gigan and Ghidorah attacking the cities, or it's Godzilla and Anguirus versus Gigan and Ghidorah. The last 40 minutes of this movie is near nonstop action. So if you're just willing to be patient and let yourself get involved with the James Bond style story that's going on, it's one hell of a thrill ride, and it's entertaining as fuck. Pro number 3 is the score for this movie. Now, this movie, the majority of this film's soundtrack consists of recycled cues from previous Toho movies like King Kong Escapes, Atragon, Battle in Outer Space, and several other Godzilla movies, all of which were composed by Akira Ifukube. He receives credit in this movie, but I don't believe Akira... Oh, no, he was not. No, hang on. I don't believe that he himself actually strung the music together in this movie. I think it was somebody else. I think it was all stock music. But it's very, very entertaining in my opinion. It's some great classic music. It's like the best of Akira Ifukube hits from previous Toho movies rolled into one soundtrack and just laid over an entertaining monster movie. You hear the Godzilla theme, which was sorely missing in Godzilla vs. Ghidorah. You hear it a few times throughout this movie, actually. Just in general, there's lots of classic music cues from other more classic Toho films that give this movie a more refreshing and familiar feel. Like if you're someone who was not a fan of Godzilla vs. Ghidorah, this movie does feel more like a conventional Godzilla movie. So this movie might wet your whistle even more so. But yeah, not much to say. But just overall, the music is awesome. It's epic. It's fitting to all the scenes. It's creepy and suspenseful when it needs to be. And then it's big, bombastic, and badass when it needs to be. It's awesome. It's classic Godzilla music. Pro number 4 is the humor. This movie isn't like laugh out loud. Well, I mean, there's a couple scenes that are that way for me. This movie isn't quite laugh out loud, split your sides open funny. And it's not even as funny as movies like Godzilla versus the Sea Monster, or especially Son of Godzilla, which another first for this. This would be the first of 3 Jun Fukuda Godzilla movies to come out for the next 3 years. By the way, this is my favorite. And this movie surprised the shit out of me when I learned that it actually was directed by Jun Fukuda. I was like, oh, wow, really? This movie really isn't all that goofy. This is a Jun Fukuda movie, and indeed it is. It doesn't feel even remotely like Son of Godzilla or Sea Monster. But since Jun Fukuda is a comedy director, he knows how to implement good humor. It's mostly just kind of goofy man-child humor, admittedly. The most infamous of all being, well, not really infamous, but the funniest line for me is when Shosaku and, what's her name? Machiko confront Genko on his way home trying to get his action tape. Shosaku makes it looks like he's pressing a gun into Genko's back, and then because he's all freaked out and scared, he faints. And then Machiko goes, "Oh God, I think he's fainted." Huh? He must have thought it was a gun. And he unwraps this fucking thing, and it's a goddamn ear cord on a stick. And the little the look on his face. It's such a fucking shit-eating grin. He goes like, huh? Yeah, you must have thought it was a gun. Oh my god. Shosaku's funny. He's one of my favorite comedic characters in a Godzilla movie. Um, and throughout the movie, he's consistently funny. Like when they're trying to um, figure out the mysteries around World Children's Land, he goes, "Well, there must be something we can do." While he's chewing on a banana, and he goes, "Oh, someone kick me hard. We're stupid. Why don't we just go and investigate these guys?" And then later, when it's found out that the World Children's Land received donations privately so they can do whatever they want with them with no questions asked, he just goes, "I don't even believe in coincidences like that." Um, he's just a smartass. That's how I would describe the humor in this movie. Everybody's a smartass, but they're funny smartasses. Um, they've always got like good foils for people, and it's funny and it's endearing and quite frankly, especially with the gun line, hilarious. Um, of course, a word from our sponsor. Um, uh, so yeah, I like this movie's humor, and there's even a couple good humorous moments with the monsters too. Mostly when Gigan and Ghidorah are relinquished from their mind control, you see Gigan's personality come through, and when he clashes with Ghidorah, it's kind of funny. And there's also a scene when Ghidorah, not even Ghidorah, god damn it, there's too many G's. When Godzilla sees the Godzilla Tower, he's got blurry vision, then he smacks himself in the head to try to see straight. I don't know why, but I just found that to be kind of funny. Um, but yeah, the humor in this movie is pretty good. Props to Jun Fukuda. Pro number 4. No, is it 4? Yeah, no, 5. Excuse me. Pro number 5. This movie's kind of violent. Mostly it has to do with the monster action. This movie definitely, in many ways, it is a conventional Godzilla movie, but at the same time, it's kind of an unconventional Godzilla movie because it feels just a bit, not necessarily grittier, but it feels a bit more edgy. Like this is a bit more of a an edgelord's Godzilla movie because um, it's a bit of a darker. Well, the aliens have a bit of a darker motivation where they just want to completely wipe out the entire human civilization. Um, Previous alien races wanted to enslave the human race, whereas the Nebulans here just want to completely kill them off. Um, but mostly with the oh, and there's also some more language. Uh, like Genko calls his girlfriend, "You're a hard bitch." Um, but mostly with the monster action, this movie is a bit more violent, and this has to do with Gigan. Godzilla, talking about the monsters real quick, Godzilla gets a pretty nasty beating in this movie too. Um, I'd actually no, no, this is probably his third worst beating of the 70s era. He mostly just he gets his neck sliced open by Gigan, and he gets right between the eyes a nasty blood stain between his eyes from Gigan's claws smacking into his forehead so many times. But just in general, Godzilla gets beaten and thrown around and stomped quite a bit in this movie. So Godzilla does take a pretty nasty beating in this movie, and also Anguirus gets his face cut open. Another first from this franchise. This was the very first time we ever saw Godzilla actually bleed. Um, we'd seen Ghidorah bleed in Destroy All Monsters, and no, that was about it. Yeah, we'd never seen Godzilla bleed before this point. And it's bright, visceral red colored blood, and there's even more as the franchise goes on. Um, So overall, yeah, this movie is a bit more violent than your typical monster movie, and for me, it always worked because I do like more violent monster action. It gives it a bit of a more visceral and gritty, grungy feel. Arm itches. Pro number 6, we're going to be getting into the monsters now. We're going to start off with Gigan. I absolutely love Gigan. Gigan's one of my absolute favorite Godzilla movies. It's Godzilla versus Gigan, Terry. And I now realize I've said Gigan's name so many fucking times in this review. Thanks, Ryan, for pointing out my own flaws. But yeah, I love Gigan. He's one of my favorite Godzilla monsters. I love his design. I love his appearance. I love his roar. I love his attacks. I love his weapons. And I do appreciate the fact that he's one of few recurring monsters throughout the entire Godzilla franchise, up there with Mechagodzilla and Ghidorah and Anguirus. Well, antagonistic monsters, he's one of, I believe, only 3, being Gigan, Mechagodzilla, and Ghidorah. But yeah, I love Gigan. He's I also love his personality. He's just an awesome kaiju. He's a more sadistic and mean-spirited and nasty type monster, especially with his powers. He can literally tear you limb from limb with his claws and his buzzsaw. And overall, he's definitely a Swiss Army knife of attacks, and he's a lot of fun to watch on screen. He certainly is a powerful kaiju, and he's a really, really good foil for Godzilla, and they have some great fights all throughout this film. So, yeah, Gigan is easily one of my favorite Godzilla kaiju. I wish he had more appearances. He has a fair amount throughout the franchise. He's got tons of video game appearances. Yes, we did, Terry. We saw that after Ghidorah. He's had a fair amount of video game appearances, and he's had a fair amount of comics. I just wish he'd had more film appearances. I mean, what we have is great. I just wish there was more, because there's a lot that you could do with Gigan. But yeah, I love him. Pro number 7 is Godzilla. No. God damn it. I'm so tired of this. I need to start numbering them. Oh, yeah, it is. Pro number 7 is Godzilla himself. Godzilla, I think he has... Should Gigan be in the MonsterVerse? Yeah, sure, why not? I think he'd be a great addition to the MonsterVerse. Godzilla himself, I believe, not counting stock footage, I think he does have a little bit less screen time than he does in Ghidorah. But I don't know. It might be equal, because he's spread pretty evenly throughout Godzilla versus Ghidorah. But here, especially in the second half of the movie, he's on screen all the time. So I think he still has a fair amount of screen time, but just overall, this is when Godzilla's superhero persona takes its fullest complete shape. He's not a goofy, even though he was goofy in the previous movie, he's not a goofy superhero for the sake of being goofy, where he does have goofy elements, but especially in this movie, he's just a pretty no nonsense, no holds barred, badass, I'm going to kick the shit out of you type superhero. A little bit like the Hulk. He's just a big badass force of destruction who just so happens to be a superhero. So overall, Godzilla is pretty damn badass in this movie, and he takes a kicking, but he keeps on licking, and he whips the living shit out of both Ghidorah and Gigan. Speaking of which, we may as well get into this. Pro number 8 is the monster fight. There's really only one monster fight in this movie, but Godzilla and Anguirus show up at, I believe, 56 minutes into this movie, and they're on screen for the rest of the movie, and they're in a pretty lengthy fight with Gigan and Ghidorah, and it goes all over the place. It starts in an industrial area, then it goes to a mountainous terrain, then it goes to a city via stock footage, but the effect is still the same. Then it goes back to a mountainous terrain. There's lots of stages to this final fight, and it certainly isn't very statically shot. There's a lot of really good camera work and good cinematography. There's lots of stages to this fight. It starts off with Godzilla facing off against Ghidorah. Then Godzilla takes on Gigan. Then Anguirus tries his luck with Ghidorah. Then Godzilla and Gigan are trading blows for a while, and then Anguirus and Godzilla both take down Ghidorah, and then Godzilla, of course, gets his ass kicked for a good chunk of it, and then finally at the very end, we have that good tag team camaraderie between Godzilla and Anguirus against both kaiju. It's really, really good stuff, and it's some of the best kaiju choreography that we've seen in the entire Godzilla franchise. I actually think the only other movie that comes close is Mechagodzilla 74. I totally lost track of what I was going to say. Fuck. Oh, yeah. And you can tell that Haruo Nakajima and the stunt coordinators with this movie really, really, really wanted this fight to be something special. And especially with this being Haruo Nakajima's final Godzilla performance, he definitely goes out with the bang. So Godzilla is awesome in this movie, and the monster fight itself is entertaining as hell. Pro number 9 is the Rampage. So there is a good 7-minute long rampage of Gigan and Ghidorah going around ripping the shit out of Tokyo. It does lead to having a lot of stock footage from Ghidorah from this movie. More on that later, but still, the rampage where Gigan and Ghidorah are tearing apart Tokyo is so goddamn fun. It's very entertaining, and it's a great showcase of Gigan's abilities as a fighter. Hello. He loves to use his claws, he loves to use his tail, and he certainly does make very good use of his chest buzzsaw. So, Gigan's a lot of fun to watch tearing shit up in the city. And yeah, this monster rampage is entertaining as fuck. And this will lead me into, I believe, pro number 10, yep, is the special effects. I know for sure that this movie's effects were done by Teruyoshi Nakano, and this is where his talents as a special effects director truly take their full shape and show their hands. Teruyoshi Nakano loved his explosions, and there's lots of explosions in this movie. Also, to kind of quote Zazubar, the effects are great when they're new. More on that later, but yeah, the special effects overall in this movie are pretty damn phenomenal. The suitimation is really, really good. Gigan's suit is fucking phenomenal. It's very well made and well detailed. He certainly looks original, even if he looks like a bladed space chicken. Um, Ghidorah looks okay. I'll get to him later. The Anguirus suit looks really good. It's still in really good shape after being used in Destroy All Monsters. And while the suitimation on Godzilla looks really good, infamously, okay, what is the name of this suit? the Shingeki Goji suit. One of the most popular designs of the entire Godzilla franchise. This would go on to be one of the most infamous Godzilla suits in the whole series. This suit was used in 4 movies in Destroy All Monsters, Godzilla's Revenge, Ghidorah, and then Gigan. It features a bell-shaped body with a very pronounced breastbone, a long neck, and a head somewhat similar to the Daisenso Goji suit, which was used in Astro Monster and Sea Monster, with very defined brows and much more menacing eyes. It was the most used suit in the entire Godzilla series, and this is when it starts to become infamous because itch. Because there's lots of scenes throughout this movie where you can see flakes of Godzilla's scales literally hanging by a thread off of Godzilla's body. And that's because after 4 movies, this suit was finally starting to fall apart. One of the most infamous scenes is after Godzilla is knocked out by Gigan and Ghidorah knocks his ass into the Godzilla tower and he somehow regains all of his strength. He turns around and starts beating his chest like Kong, and he's roaring at the screen. You can see flakes of his scales hanging off the bottoms of his arms. And it's kind of cringy, and it's just like, oh, God. Yeah, you can tell this suit's falling apart. As Trev stated once, though, I actually do think that that works to this movie's advantage because it actually does look like Godzilla's getting his ass kicked throughout the film. So the fact that he's got literally bits of his flesh hanging off of him, it's effective in showcasing that Godzilla's certainly taken a beating. So happy accident, but it is still kind of distracting nonetheless because you can so obviously in so many shots see pieces of Godzilla's suit hanging by a thread or even just flying off during in the middle of a take. You can tell, yeah, this suit was on its last legs. But still, it does look good in this movie. But yeah, the effects overall are really good. The miniature sets, when they're new, are really well made. The optically animated effects for like Ghidorah's gravity beams and Godzilla's atomic breath. Godzilla doesn't use his atomic breath very much, which is also strange because he uses it a shit ton in the previous movie, but he uses it only 4 times in this film. But those look great too. The explosions and fire and smoke effects all look really good. Overall, and the wire work is really good too. I didn't see a single wire watching this movie. Overall, yeah, the effects are pretty damn fantastic, and Teruyoshi Nakano was definitely coming into his own with this movie. Yeah, the effects are great. Nope, that's not a spitter. With all these good things to say about Godzilla vs. Gigan, what are the cons? I have 4. Starting with the least of which, Anguirus. I do love Anguirus. I think Anguirus is still one of my favorite Godzilla kaiju, and in his own way, I think he's still one of the most underrated. But unfortunately, Anguirus is just kind of a punching bag in this movie, and the fact that no matter what he goes up against, he just always gets his ass kicked. He's a tenacious fighter, and he tries his best, but especially when he goes up against Ghidorah, he just kind of gets his ass kicked. And well, it's great to see Anguirus use one of his signature moves, tossing himself back and smashing his spiky carapace into Ghidorah multiple times. So that's great. His chemistry with Godzilla is great, and his like really good tag team mentality with Godzilla is really, really good too. But when he's by himself, Anguirus just gets the shit beat out of him. And it's kind of frustrating, especially for an Anguirus fan. I want to see Anguirus actually put up a good fight. But here, he just kind of gets his ass kicked. Con number 2 is, well, I know I said I take this away in my Destroy All Monsters review, but I still do say that this is true. Destroy All Monsters, I still do consider to be Invasion of the Astro Monster 2.0. This movie is very similar to Invasion of the Astro Monster and Destroy All Monsters, especially with the aliens. The aliens are coming back and using Ghidorah plus another monster under their control to wipe out the human race and destroy the world. It does feel kind of similar to that, and since Destroy All Monsters was borrowing elements from Invasion of the Astro Monster for its plot, so too is this movie. Funny enough, all 3 movies were 3 years apart. Well, yeah, no. 3 to 4 years. Because there's Invasion was in 65, then Destroy All Monsters was in 68, and now here we have Gigan in 72. I can see why, because those are some of the most classic alien plots for the Godzilla franchise. But at this point, it's not getting necessarily stale, but it is feeling a bit repetitive because of how similar all 3 of these movies feel plot-wise. Though, in my opinion, these movies have the best of both worlds. Whereas the kaiju stuff is good in Destroy All Monsters, and the human stuff is good in Invasion of the Astro Monster, this movie does the best of both worlds. The human plot line is very entertaining, and the kaiju action is entertaining as fuck in this movie. So, it's not necessarily a huge problem in terms of that, in terms of being entertaining, but I can recognize that they're just trying to reuse older ideas that worked in order to make this thing work as well. And it's not a huge, it's kind of hard to describe. It's more like a nitpick, but it is definitely noticeable. And depending on who you ask, it may just be a nitpick or a significant problem. What is a significant problem is King Ghidorah in this movie. This pretty much ties into my last con, but looking past that for just a moment, not only is there that issue, but Ghidorah also kind of looks like shit in this movie. I don't know no, I don't think they used a brand new suit, but they did use different head designs for Ghidorah in this movie. And you can tell that this Ghidorah suit was on its last limbs as well, because Ghidorah is barely used in this movie. He's just kind of there to be like a big giant monster turret because of his 3 heads and his gravity beams. There's some shots where Ghidorah looks fine. The new suit looks fine. But he looks at his worst when he's flying. Sometimes it's just the suit being lifted by wires and having the head slowly move and roar and chitter. But then there's other moments where it's just Ghidorah flying around. It's just a prop with glowing red eyes. The wings don't move, the heads don't move, the tails don't move. It literally just looks like a King Ghidorah toy on a string being spun around in a circle. But this leads into this movie's biggest problem, which I will agree with, is the overuse of stock footage. Not quite as badly as Godzilla's Revenge, but this movie does use a fair amount of stock footage. In the monster fights, the stock footage is used as a supplementary tool, which is better. They just use bits and pieces here and there to make the fight just a bit longer. But where I take issue is King Ghidorah is at least 80% stock footage in this movie. Whenever the suit is not being used for very minor scenes, it's just stock footage. Like all of Ghidorah's attack, or 90% of Ghidorah's attack scenes on the city, like when he's by himself, it's all stock footage from Ghidorah, Astro Monster, and Destroy All Monsters. Oh, and speaking of which, no, the Destroy All Monsters footage comes in when Anguirus fights Ghidorah all by himself. It's almost entirely Destroy All Monsters stock footage. And it's also kind of sad too, because a lot of those scenes took place during the day, and the majority of this movie takes place at night. So there's a lot of really obvious day for night shots that are used. Like they give it a darker tint on the day scenes with Ghidorah to make it look like it's night. But if you're familiar with Godzilla movies, you can still tell that's stock footage. That's from previous movies. They just put a dark tint over it to try to hide the fact that it takes place during the day. It doesn't really work. And also, a vast majority of Godzilla's fights with Ghidorah is also stock footage. This one irks me even more because there's a few shots where you can clearly see both Rodan in one shot and Mothra in one shot, too. A lot of footage is taken from Ghidra and Astro Monster whenever Godzilla fights Ghidorah in this movie. And it's distracting when you go from the Ghidra suit to the Astro Monster suit to then the Gigan suit all in 3 consecutive shots. It's jarring and distracting and kind of annoying. So a lot of people like to bitch and complain about the use of stock footage in this movie, and I see why, and I can agree with some criticisms. It can be quite frustrating. But it's not nearly as bad as other Godzilla movies and as bad as the next one. Oh dear, the next movie. But this movie being an hour and 29 minutes, I think this movie uses about 10 minutes worth of stock footage, which is kind of sad. It is spread pretty evenly throughout the entire movie, so it's not like they're using giant chunks of stock footage in one specific area. They just sprinkle it all throughout the movie to. This is bad because it pads out the runtime, but they were trying to be smart with it, and they were trying to incorporate it in a bit of a smarter way, so that way it wasn't so jarring and jolting. So I can see the effort, but in the end, it still is kind of annoying. And especially since I do think this movie had a bit of a bigger budget than Godzilla vs. Ghidorah did. So it just kind of makes me ask, well, why can you achieve that movie using very little stock footage, yet with this movie, you had to use almost 10 minutes worth. Like, what the hell? And you had more money to play with. Overall, though, that's all I have to say about Godzilla vs. Gigan. My final thoughts are this movie is awesome. I can see its flaws, and I can't understand if someone says they don't dig it, but I don't think this is a bad movie at all. I absolutely love Godzilla vs. Gigan. It's one of my favorite Godzilla movies of all time. It's one of my favorite kaiju films of all time. And I don't really know. It's either this or Mechagodzilla 74, but I'm pretty sure this is my number one favorite Showa Godzilla movie. As obvious due to the fact that I have the most amount of nostalgia for this movie because it was the first Godzilla movie that I ever owned. So, unlike my last review, I will be giving this movie just a perfect solid 10 out of 10. I had an absolute blast rewatching it, just as I did with Godzilla vs. Ghidorah. And yeah, I highly recommend this movie. It's very entertaining. It's a lot of fun. It's a total blast. Godzilla vs. Gigan is a very special movie. That works. At least got one burp. Post your comments down below. Let me know what you think, and hit the like button and hit the subscribe button, and share this video with your friends. Look forward to the next episode of Super Kaiju Binge, where we discuss one of the most infamous and rushed cheap Godzilla movies ever made with 1973's Godzilla versus Megalon. Oh dear. And as always, go out and if you see somebody whose shadow resembles a giant cockroach, run or try to kill it. And I will see you guys in the next video.